Joan Esposito, live.
Celebrating our power to bring about change.
Local.
Everybody has to work together.
And progressive.
I think you get the idea.
On WCPT 820.
Hi. Thanks for being here this Monday, January 20th. Thank you for spending part of your holiday with us here at WCPT. Today is the day where we honor Martin Luther King Jr. For those of you who are a little bit younger than me, he was a minister, a Baptist minister, who, much like Gandhi in India, protested inequality and unfairness, but did it in a very nonviolent way. That was what he was all about, was nonviolence, nonviolent protest. He spoke all around the country, advocating for civil rights for people of color, fighting against Jim Crow laws and legalized discrimination. You know, we think we're backsliding because a little bit, maybe more than a little bit, we are socially. But when you think about what things were like when Martin Luther King started leading marches and protests, the fact that segregation was still widely accepted, the fact that there were Jim Crow laws, there were sunset cities. You know, Martin Luther King, we always talk to Suzanne Chad and Professors Chad and William Muck from North Central College in Naperville. Martin Luther King came to North Central College in Naperville to speak to students and those gathered there. But he couldn't spend the night in Naperville because Naperville at that time was what was called a sundown city. There were lots of sundown cities. That meant that any black people had to be out of the city by sundown. They remained in that city at their peril. Martin Luther King was brought into North Central College in Naperville. I believe the day he was there, he spoke to 2 different groups. And then at the end of the day, he had to be transported to a different city where he could spend the night because he couldn't spend the night in Naperville. He was assassinated April 4th in Memphis, Tennessee. At the time, he was planning a national occupation of Washington, D.C. It was going to be called the Poor People's Campaign. That's what he did everywhere he went. Peaceful, non-violent protest. And while we are backsliding right now in many respects as a country, when you really learn about the day in, day out life back in the 50s and 60s, we have made progress. We have made progress. And, you know, we're worried about Kash Patel weaponizing the FBI. In King's day, J. Edgar Hoover, the infamous J. Edgar Hoover, was in charge of the FBI. And if you've ever read anything about that man, one of the ways that he stayed in power, he had files on everybody. He had agents digging up dirt on everybody. The one book I read about J. Edgar Hoover said that when somebody was elected to office at the national level in a high-powered position, not everybody, he would meet with them, ostensibly to brief them. But what he would brief them about, in part, was what he had learned about them. And the message was, don't mess with me. In any way, shape, or form, don't mess with me, or this file I have here that I am sharing with you, I can't guarantee that a different administrator won't make it public. I can't guarantee your safety unless I'm in this job. If I'm in this job, I can keep you safe from this information getting out. This kind of sounds very Kash Patel-like, doesn't it? And he considered Martin Luther King a radical, which he was, though he was a nonviolent radical. And the FBI spied on him, recorded his conversations. According to Martin Luther King's biography on Wikipedia, it says here that in 1964, the FBI mailed King a threatening anonymous letter. Martin Luther King told people that he thought it was an attempt to make him commit suicide. He did not. In 1964, he won the Nobel Peace Prize for his work to try to bring about racial equity. After his death, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom and the Congressional Gold Medal. And today was established as a holiday. The holiday was put on the record books in 1971. The federal holiday was first observed in 1986. There are a lot of really famous speeches that Martin Luther King gave. One of my favorite has to do with hope and not giving in and not giving up. I can think of no better way to honor Martin Luther King Jr. than by sharing one portion of one of these incredible speeches with you. Listen to this.
I know you're asking today, how long will it take? Somebody's asking, how long will prejudice blind the visions of men? I come to say to you this afternoon, however difficult the moment, yes, sir, however frustrating the hour, it will not be long, because truth crushed earth will rise again. Yes, sir. How long? Not long. Yes, sir. Because no lie can live forever. Yes, sir. How long? Not long. How long? Because you shall reap what you sow. Yes, sir. How long? Not long. How long? Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yes, that scaffold sways the future. Yes. Behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. How long? Not long. Because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Yes, how long? Not long. Not long. Because mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Yes, he's trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. Yes, sir. He's loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. Yes, his truth is marching on. Yes, sir. He has sounded forth the trumpet that shall never call retreat. He is sifting out the hearts of men before his judgment seat. Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on.
Today, on this federal holiday, we honor Martin Luther King Jr., and I think it's a great time to remember peaceful protest, nonviolent resistance. In news that I'm sure Martin Luther King Jr. would have been pleased to hear, 3 hostages have been released. 3 Israeli hostages have been released by Hamas. This is unfolding the way we told you about last week. The Israeli cabinet voted to sign off on the deal Friday. And once the deal was agreed to, within the first 2 to 3 days, 3 hostages were set to be released in exchange for hundreds no, not hundreds. Today it was 90. 3 Israeli hostages released for 90 Palestinian prisoners. They were 3 Israeli women. This agreement specifies that the first hostages to be released are going to be the children, the elderly, women, and anyone who is injured. That will be phase 1. There is set to be a second phase where anybody not covered by that first one, plus any Israeli soldiers taken captive. That is going to be a part of phase 2. These 3 Israeli women have been held captive for 471 days. 471 days. They have been in captivity for more than a year. 24-year-old Romy Gonen, she was at that music festival that Hamas attacked. It was a music festival designed to promote peace. 28-year-old Emily Damari. She was kidnapped from her home. She lived on a kibbutz in southern Israel. Because remember, Hamas went across the border into Israel. And 31-year-old Doran Steinbrecher. She was a veterinary nurse, also taken from her home in a kibbutz. She called her mother and told her she was hiding under her bed because somebody had broken into her room. 10 minutes later, she sent a voice message to her friends on October 7th, a message that said only one thing: they've got me, they've got me. 471 days. So apparently the rule of thumb here is that what Israel has agreed to is 30 Palestinian prisoners in exchange for each civilian hostage. And now we are waiting for more to come. We knew that within the first 2 or 3 days, there was an agreement to release 3 people. So this is certainly disappointing that they're not all being released simultaneously. But so far, what has been agreed to seems to be working. We will, of course, keep an eye on this. And a sad note today, Cecile Richards. Anybody who has paid any attention in the last few decades to Planned Parenthood knows Cecile Richards, daughter of former Democratic Texas Governor Ann Richards, who was governor before Mr. Bush. Ann Richards was a real firecracker. She was very blunt and very much loved in Texas. But her daughter, Cecile, while often was, the Democrats tried to recruit her to run for office, she preferred to organize. She wanted to work behind the scenes. and she led Planned Parenthood nationally very successfully for very many years. She told people in later years that one of her regrets, she was a fierce abortion rights advocate, but she said one of her regrets was that she didn't fight. She doesn't feel she fought hard enough. She knew that the majority of the public supported abortion rights. She knew with Roe v. Wade it was the law of the land. And she said, looking back, I counted too much on that. I knew we had popular support, and I knew it was the law. But I didn't realize the lengths to which Republicans would go to fight us on this. She was a great leader, and she was so articulate. But looking back on things, she wished she had fought harder and done more, especially in the arena of public opinion. She knew, like we know now, the majority of people support abortion rights. It doesn't mean they're not disappearing all across the country because of evangelical Christians and those who believe it is simply a good political tactic. Cecile Richards announced about a year ago that she had a brain tumor. She still was well enough. Remember, she spoke at the Democratic National Convention in August and spoke beautifully. But glioblastomas are nasty things. And even with surgery and even with treatment, once you're diagnosed with it, you've got about a year. If you're really, really lucky, you've got about a year and a half. There is some progress being made against this. That therapy called CAR-T that is being used successfully against blood cancers has shown some progress against these horrible, awful tumors. This, by the way, is what killed Gene Siskel. And our good friend from television, Tim Weigel. Anyway, I want to read the statement that was issued by the family of Cecile Richards. This morning, our beloved Cecile passed away at home, surrounded by her family and her ever-loyal dog, Ollie. Our hearts are broken today, but no words can do justice to the joy she brought to our lives. We're grateful to the doctors and healthcare workers who provided her excellent care and the friends, family, and well-wishers who've been by her side this challenging time. If you'd like to celebrate Cecile today, we invite you to put on some New Orleans jazz, gather with friends and family over a good meal, and remember something she said a lot over the last year. Quote, "It's not hard to imagine future generations one day asking, when there was so much at stake for our country, what did you do? The only acceptable answer is everything we could." Signed Kirk, Lily, Hannah, and Daniel. In other news, there was, despite this breathtaking, bone-chilling cold, there were some folks who gathered downtown today in protest. There was some political activity in Washington today. We had a new administration sworn in, and everything, of course, was moved indoors because it's in the 20s in Washington. It's 23. I mean, in Chicago, 23 is practically bikini weather. But you know what? There are some who are saying that Donald Trump realized that he wasn't going to have a great crowd size for his inauguration. So this idea of moving it inside because of the weather. There were a couple of older white male farmers who were being interviewed. They'd shown up in Washington for the inauguration. And they said to the reporter, they were actually ticked off. They said to the reporter, you know, we don't stop milking the cows because it gets cold. And by the way, when John F. Kennedy was inaugurated, it was colder than this, and it was held outside. Maybe Democrats are tougher. I don't know. The celebration of the speech was moved to an arena, and there was a desk set up in the arena. The idea was that Trump was going to make a big show of signing executive orders. And remember, a lot of his executive orders are going to be challenged in court. So who knows? Who knows what will stand when all is said and done? But, you know, he's acting on the things that he said. You know, he's gonna end birthright citizenship. Well, you know what? Some of this stuff is not legal. And, you know, it's going to be in court for the foreseeable future. But as I said, there was a protest down in downtown Chicago today. I can only imagine that with the cold temperatures, it perhaps wasn't as large as the organizers originally hoped. But there was one person who was there representing Indivisible Chicago, Betty Alzamora, who is a board member for Indivisible Chicago, was there today braving these extreme temperatures to go on record protesting the beginning of what is going to be an absolutely chaotic 4 years. And we recorded Trump's speech, but if you want to know what he said, I would suggest that you, the Washington Post parsed his speech, and I'm not going to bring it to you because it was filled with lies. Filled with lies. You know, I don't know now that Bezos is kowtowing to Trump if the Washington Post is going to start counting Trump's lies like it did with the last administration. It didn't start. They didn't start it right away, but eventually that's what they did, and they hit 30,000. Pretty much, I would say, 4/5 of what he said in his speech today is demonstrably untrue. So I'm not playing any of that. But we are going to talk to Betty Alzamora about what happened today and about things that Indivisible Chicago is planning to do in the near future. We'll be right back after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Betty Alzamora is a board member for Indivisible Chicago, and she braved these incredible Chicago-like temperatures to join up with some other folks downtown today in protest of what was happening in Washington. Betty, thank you so much for being here.
Joan, thank you very much for having me.
Man, I got to say, I've got to hand it to you. I certainly hope you had, you know, the hat, the glove, the scarf, the puffy coat, the insulated boots today.
for the hand warmers that volunteers were giving out, and especially for the foot warmers as well.
Yeah.
I haven't been that cold in a very long time, Joan, and I grew up in Montreal, so that's saying something.
So what were people saying today? What was their reason for braving the cold to join fellow protesters?
Yeah, so, it was really great. It was, I think, all around what I felt was really just the energy of unity, of people coming together. Whatever issues might have been top of mind, it was the fact that people were willing to be out in this weather. The community, the solidarity above everything else. You just kind of you felt the energy in the air that, we're united, we're coming together as coalitions, and everybody is just, energized and getting ready to continue the fight.
What plans? I mean, I assume Indivisible Chicago that you guys have been meeting, you've been talking about what next steps are, how to move forward, especially in this first year when I think it's going to be a real fire hose of stuff coming out of the White House. How have you planned to deal with all this?
I think most importantly, we've brought community members together as part of community gatherings just to, be able to get a sense of where people are in this moment, to energize people, to remind them that we're all in this together. No one single person is alone. Whether you choose to work with us at Indivisible Chicago or many of the other organizations, grassroots progressive organizations that are out there, find your political home. That's one of the messages that we're doing. We're following up later this week on Saturday with a community gathering at Columbia College Chicago. Our event is called Continue the Fight, and we'll be there from 1 to 4 o'clock that afternoon, talking with community members, with invited panel speakers that will be there throughout the afternoon, and running some breakout sessions to start, putting more concrete thought and plan and action to a series of strategies and tactics that we'll be running, depending on where people want to dedicate their energy towards. So it's I think, the most important thing is really just having to acknowledge, everything that everybody had to acknowledge the day after the election, the confusion, the fear, the anger, the grief, and then translating all of that, Joan, into community and being able to start thinking about taking more concrete actions as we plan for whatever comes down our way. I'm just getting home, so I haven't been able to see the dozens of, the actions that already are taking place. I know, immigration is among top of the list, as maybe other things, and so we'll be organizing around activities related to all of that.
The Columbia College event this Saturday is indoors, correct? So in case people are thinking that they'd have to brave the cold.
No, we are, in fact, having it indoors. It's a 3-hour event. You can find more information on the indivisiblechicago.com website and where you can sign up. We encourage people to come out and just learn more in-depth information about some of the issues that we're thinking about, our own approach to the strategy. We've been around since 2017. We've organized campaigns, related to the first Trump administration, and that is the approach, the thoughtful, intentional, community-led approach that we're going to be taking. Very, very much looking forward to bringing our progressive activists together in community to have more of that conversation.
I know that there is a new issue of the Indivisible Guide where, whereas the first one was, oh my God, this is how government works, this is how you can have your voice heard. The new guide that was written up was written specifically for what could be expected with a Trump presidency. Tell me how it's different.
I think it's more detailed with specific, more concrete actions, more understanding of what Trump 2.0 will bring by way of their approach of they have had more time to plan out, a playbook. We all saw it over the last year, something called Project 2025. So it's about being able to address and be more intentional about their approach, given that they have more power, they're far more organized, and they have a lot more things lining up, to support their agenda moving forward. So, it's a 30-page document, the Indivisible 2.0 guide. We encourage people to take a look at it and just become familiar with it. But a lot of the strategies and tactics that we will be discussing this coming weekend are reflected in that guide as well.
One of the things that I've been talking about with people is, grassroots are going to be, I think, taking the lead in resistance over the next 4 years. But we are also looking at Democratic leadership, at least as it exists now, and wondering, is there somebody who's going to sort of step forward and really lead the charge? Do you think about that? Is that important? And if you do, is there anybody you see who's potentially going to be in that role?
I think it's early days for me to actually be, from my personal perspective, to say that there's one individual that I would look for. But I do admire a lot of the progressive leaders that we have been working with of late. Chicago is blessed to have a lot of those folks, in state and local roles. I mean, prior to the rally and march this morning, I was out with the Northwest Side Progressives, for instance. They had done a tremendous job of being able to organize in a relatively short period of time briefings on Know Your Rights and being able to mobilize 150 volunteers to start giving out Know Your Rights information at various different places across the Northwest Side. So there's a host of leadership, Joan, that I admire for just basically getting out there and doing it. And that's leadership that is state, local, and congressional level that just got up and went, and started doing things. That's the kind of, actions that I would support from leaders in the progressive side. And we'll be looking forward to being able to encourage more of those leaders to do the same and to give them the energy and the courage to push forth with that kind of action moving forward.
What are Indivisible Chicago's plans beyond a meeting this Saturday at Columbia College?
I think it's about organizing our communities, our activist membership within chapters across the city, within chapters in the near suburbs, being able to partner in coalition with as many other grassroots. To your point, there's so many incredibly valuable grassroots organizations that are out there. So how do we partner? And in particular, for those that represent communities that are more of the directly impacted, how do we provide the support? How do we allow them to take the leadership roles that they deserve and should have as members of the directly impacted community? And what are the skill sets and the tactics that we can bring to support some of the actions that they will be recommending and pursuing over the next 4 years?
Betty, if somebody's listening to our discussion and they're thinking to themselves, I haven't been able to figure out what I can do to make the next 4 years pass as quickly and as unpainfully as possible. And, they're listening to our conversation and thinking maybe Indivisible Chicago is a group that they could be a part of. Tell them, first of all, how they can be a part of it and the kinds of activities or organizing events that they could expect to be a part of?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, Joan. I mean, first and foremost, I'd recommend for folks to consider coming out to the Continue the Fight event that we'll be hosting on Saturday. It's a great way to meet people. Part of our intended objective for Saturday is to allow people the opportunity to mingle and meet other people. That's one way of doing it. Indivisible Chicago is formed of, it's a coalition of network chapters. So one thing that people can do is actually go to our website and look to see what chapters are in their neighborhoods and connect with those chapters and with the leaders that run those chapters so they can be part of the regular meetings that are being held where a lot of the, more in-depth conversations are being had about things that people are getting involved in, about the issues that matter to the membership for the neighborhoods that they represent. So those are things that people can definitely do. And certainly, just remain as informed and plugged into other grassroots progressive organizations that are out there and just, keep trying to learn about what their issues are, what their causes, what their actions are so that, we're better able to partner with coalition members as well.
And Betty, a lot of our listeners live in the collar counties, the suburbs. Where would you suggest they look if they are interested in being more active?
Oh, wow. I mean, that's another great question. There's several things that they can do. Indivisible.org, which is the national website for Indivisible, has a national directory of chapters that, go beyond obviously just the Chicago area. So people can look up there. I can speak, there's many organizations that are outside of the Chicagoland area. So Indivisible Evanston, you've got Indivisible Naperville, you've got Indivisible West Suburban Chicago, and so forth. There's a lot of other groups that are in, the near suburbs that are forming that provide opportunities for people to get engaged and, maybe get more focused on some of the more local things that are happening within their communities, as well as some of these campaigns that will be happening that are more, at the state and national level.
There's something for everyone, isn't there, Buddy?
There's absolutely something for everyone. It's, look us up at indivisibleschicago.com, indivisible.org, and, we welcome all people, and most importantly, just find your political home, find the people, find your people that you're going to spend time with. There is no need to do this all alone. If there's one thing, Joan, that we learned today, 0-degree weather is not going to stop people from coming together in unity and solidarity. That, I think, is the important thing.
And I think it's really important, too, to remember, because I don't know about you, Betty, but, I was pretty demoralized after the election. Not that I was super shocked, but I was still demoralized. Donald Trump would like people to believe that he won in a landslide and that he has this huge mandate. He won with one of the slimmest margins ever recorded in presidential elections. So don't listen to him when he said, that he won in a landslide and this is what the entire country wants, because there are still more of us than there are of them. And, I think for your own mental health, even if it's not a specifically political organization, what do you care about? Do you care about books and books being banned? Then attend your library board meetings. Just see what's being talked about. Make sure you know the people who are making the decisions and make sure they know you're watching. Do you care about women's rights? There's tons of groups that you can support that do all different kinds of aspects of work when it comes to female autonomy. There's plenty to do. You can't do everything, but you can do something. And Betty is a perfect example of that.
I sure appreciate you, and thank you for the shout out there, Joan. And I couldn't agree with you more. There's so many different ways to remain engaged. There's so many different ways. It's not just continuing and maintaining the hope. It's the solidarity of doing this all together, taking it one day at a time, and knowing that there's probably more of us than there are of them. This is not a mandate, to your point. It was a very slim margin, and we can remain intentional and focused and continue the fight.
Thank you so much. Betty Alzamora is a board member for Indivisible Chicago. She was out at the Federal Plaza today protesting as the inauguration was taking place in Washington. We are going to take a break. We're going to come back with more after this.
Don't turn that dial.
A dangerous mistake to make.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now on WCPT 820.
Okay, one thing that I'm going to say right now, going forward, and I will probably repeat myself. No, I'll certainly repeat myself. One thing we cannot lose in the next 4 years is our sense of humor. Things are going to be dark, but we have to find a smile where we can find it. What brought me smiles this morning? Well, it was pointed out that both First Lady Jill Biden and incoming First Lady Melania Trump both wore American-designed outfits, American designers. First Lady Jill Biden decked out in Ralph Lauren. Melania Trump was somebody I've never heard of before, somebody by the name of, not that I'm on fashion's cutting edge, folks, but designer by the name of Lippy did her outfit, and somebody else did her hat. Did you see that hat? Ray said she looked like the Hamburglar. It is, practically covered her eyes. It's down over her eyes, and it had a very hard, very big brim. And as the photographers observed, after Donald Trump was sworn in, he leaned over to give her a kiss on the cheek, and he couldn't get there because of the brim of her hat. It was so big that it kept his face away from hers. Do you think that was the point? I don't know. Excuse me. I don't know if that was the point or not. One other thing that I want to share with you, this got recorded as former President Bush and Laura Bush and Barack Obama were being, they gathered, to get lined up to walk in. And the transition team aide who was there clearly had a great relationship, at least formerly, with the Bushes, because she asked them, as she was, there's like George and Laura are first, Barack is standing behind them, and she asks the Bushes, are you going to behave? It was clearly a jovial moment. She wasn't being insulting. But even though the question was directed at the Bushes, Barack Obama spoke up. Shook his head. Are you going to behave? And Obama takes another step closer to the Bushes and goes, nope. There was a camera there, and we have sound from this. Paul, go ahead and play it.
For a second. Are you going to behave or not? No. All right. Start bam.
Are you going to behave or not? Nope. Oh, all right. And he smiled, and he shook his head, and then he looked over. The Bushes, of course, smiling wide. A lot of people still don't know what to make of the fact that Michelle Obama decided to take a pass. You know, I don't blame her. I don't blame her. She's going to sit there and pretend everything's okay. I mean, if you want to know what Michelle Obama thinks, listen to the speech that she made for Kamala Harris, where she talked about how, people say the affirmative action is wrong, but there's always been affirmative action for rich kids. Yeah. Make a donation, build a building, and your kid gets into an Ivy League school, no matter if they don't have the kind of academic record that would otherwise get them in. Yeah. I don't care. You know, if you read her book, or at least her first book, I don't think I read her second book, she talks about how she hates politics, hates it. You know, she supported Barack. She supported his ambition. She did what was expected of her and more. But she hates politics. And I think she's done with politics. And I don't blame her. Also, you heard from the Associated Press at the top of the hour about President Biden. President Biden pardoning not only, obviously, Hunter, which happened a while ago, but pardoning other family members because Kash Patel and others in the incoming Trump administration have said that they're going to go after his family. He's quoted in the Washington Post as saying, this is Joe Biden. He also, I will tell you about some other pardons. He said, these public servants have served our nation with honor and distinction and do not deserve to be targets of unjustified and politically motivated prosecutions. I believe in the rule of law. But these are exceptional circumstances, and I cannot, in good conscience, do nothing. Who else did he pardon? Anthony Fauci. Anthony Fauci was named on Kash Patel's enemies list. Anthony Fauci, the 80-some-year-old guy who led our response against AIDS and also COVID. Anthony Fauci, who recently almost died because of the Nile virus. Yeah, they were planning to go after him legally. Anthony Fauci, also retired General Mark Milley. Biden believed that Donald Trump was going to be going after him as well and has issued a preemptive pardon to retired General Mark Milley, Anthony Fauci, and the members of and staff of the January 6th Congressional Committee. You know, Adam Kinzinger very publicly told Stephen Colbert he didn't want a pardon. You know, let Trump come after him if he wants to. And he said, even if I'm in jail, from a jail cell, I will continue to be a thorn in his side and speaking out about what he's doing. Let him put me in jail. That was, I think most people would rather not go through that. Even if they were able to successfully battle a legal effort to bring some kind of charges against them, that kind of fight is not only emotionally draining, it is wildly expensive. Just bringing charges against somebody forces them to have to defend themselves. And the emotional and financial toll, even if you are 100% innocent, is really something. Not something that people who have behaved according to the law should ever have to go through. And it's just retribution. Even if they can't win the cases, they want to make their lives miserable because they want them to suffer for what they did. President Biden also pardoning the police officers who testified before the January 6th committee. And that's really important. Michael Fanone was interviewed by, I can't remember if it was CNN, and he said he was really worried, not just that they were going to come after him legally, but that if they decided to target Fanone, he said not only will that will put him, his mom, his family members at risk of violence from Trump supporters. That simply by targeting him legally, that would have made him and his family the target of violence. And he's not wrong. You know, these days, it seems that anybody who really puts their mind to it can get a firearm. And not everybody who gets those weapons is mentally fit. Michael Fanone had every reason to worry about the safety of him, his mom, and his other family members, including his kids. But President Joe Biden, as he was exiting the building, has given those police officers pardons, preemptive pardons as well. We are going to talk about the events of the day. First with John Shaw from the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute, and then later Chris Bury. And we're going to start that right after a break for news.
Don't turn that dial.
A dangerous mistake to make.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now on WCPT 820.
Joining me is John Shaw, director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute. That's at Southern Illinois University. John, how are you today?
Hey, Joan, Happy New Year to you. We haven't spoken in 2025, so I hope you're doing well.
Yes. All things considered, I'm doing as well as could be expected. You know, I was talking with somebody recently. When Donald Trump was elected the first time, I mean, it was like somebody poured ice water over your head. And, you know, there was all of a sudden there was the Indivisible Guide, and there were indivisible chapters being formed all over the country. And it was like there was, you know, we picked ourselves up off the floor and we were getting ready to fight. This time around, I believe that immediate anger, that immediate burst of energy is a little bit, the reaction is a little bit different this time. I think this Donald Trump victory has been harder to bounce back from. I do still think that there's going to be an awful lot of resistance, but I think it is going to be not quite so fueled by anger. I think this is going to be a colder, more measured kind of resistance this time around. What's in the people you know? What have you seen as far as the difference between this Trump election and the last Trump election?
Well, no, I think you framed it really nicely. I mean, I think that in 2016, you know, it was a shocking election, a shocking result. I remember as a reporter, I was covering the 2017 inaugural outside, and it was just this, even, you know, among the inaugural goers, it was just a sense of kind of disbelief. And there was a sense of it being something of a fluke. You know, Hillary Clinton wasn't a great candidate, you know, and so forth. You know, now I think we're facing a much more sober reality, which is after a presidency that was uneven, at least, and, you know, included, you know, the total debacle on COVID and, you know, January 6th. And, you know, given that entire body of evidence and subsequent criminal indictments and criminal conviction, with that entire body of evidence, you know, the American people voted for Donald Trump again. And, you know, as one article said, you know, we can no longer say, you know, who are we? I mean, you know, we the nation chose Donald Trump. And so I think there is a kind of a shell shock and disbelief for certainly, almost half the population who opposed him. And again, let's just get one thing on the table that I heard one commentator say when we talk about just the size of Trump's win. I think the numbers now show that he won something like 49.8 and Harris won like 48.5. So he won by like 1.3%. Yeah, it was not this. It was not this overwhelming landslide. I mean, he did win all 7 swing states, so that was, that you have to give him that. So to answer your question, I mean, I think among the Democrats there is this sense that Trump, in some way, has found a message that resonates with a large group of Americans, and he's tapped into something that is here for a while. It's not just something that passed and kind of a fluke. So I think that to speak more specifically to your point, I mean, I do think that the Democrats have to do some recalibration and say, okay, what is it about almost half the American people? What is it about Trump that almost half the American people resonated with or responded to? And at least have that as your initial frame. And then you need to do some soul searching about where you have gone wrong. And then you need to find areas of I don't want to use the word resistance, but areas of response. And I think, as you said, the last time it was this sort of, okay, we're going to resist everything. And frankly, I think a lot of people started, every tweet and every kind of Trump utterance, it was just, this indignation and anger. And I think now there's a more tempered response, which is, this is going to be hard. And this is, from the Democratic perspective, this is going to be bad. But they need to focus on, the policies that are actually going into effect, find ways to respond to those, to discuss them intelligently, to formulate a new agenda that speaks to the American people. So I think there's just a lot of work to do. And I think just utterly pragmatically, and I read this from a blog, Democrats need to be focused on one thing, which is winning back the House in 2026, because when you have control of one institution, whether it be the House or Senate, it just allows you to do some stuff in terms of blocking bad things that you cannot do when the other party controls all the levers of government. So I think in terms of I think the Democrats need to find ways to respond to the Trump agenda, and he has narrow majorities in Congress now. Admittedly, Republicans have gone lockstep on almost everything, but there are going to be some things where there is going to be some splintering in his base, and Democrats need to be alert to that and be able to respond.
There has been some advice offered that maybe, because I agree with you, we would like to regain some control with the midterm elections, and some have said, what, let Trump be Trump. You know what? Let it be awful. Let it be horrible. Let people see what they voted for, and then maybe they'll wake up and say, "Whoa, this isn't what I meant. This isn't what I thought he would do," and that might be a winning strategy for the midterms. What do you think about that advice?
Well, I mean, I think just the practical thing is, that is what is going to happen. I mean, Trump and the Republicans own Washington for the next 2 years. And so, the midterms are going to be a 100% referendum on the Republican Party and the Trump agenda. That's what it's going to be. So that's the reality. I guess what I would say is going after that, if I were a Democrat, I would much rather have control of one chamber, however small it is, just to be able to, to chair, to be able to organize committees and to be able to have oversight hearings. Those are just kind of some simple mechanical things that you can do when you control one chamber that you cannot do when you are just, kind of a large minority in both chambers. So the bottom line is, Trump owns Washington for the next 2 years, and the American people in 2 years are going to have a really clear, decision about whether they like what they've seen. But going, I think the Democrats really need to try to position themselves to make some big gains in the House and also locally. I mean, we cannot forget that, the Democratic Party has lost lots of its standing, in state and local elections and so forth. So this needs to be a kind of, across the board rebuilding and regrouping and reformulating.
One thing, John, that I thought was interesting is that even though Donald Trump won at the presidential level, a lot of those same states that went for Donald Trump ended up installing Democratic senators, Democratic governors, Democratic congresspeople. It was almost, it seemed like there was a lot of split balloting going on.
Yeah, I do think so. I guess as an analyst, we need to kind of take the big picture and speak a truth, which is Trump is a singular force in American politics. I don't understand his appeal. I have to say, I understand parts of his appeal. I understand his ability to tap into anger and resentment. There's a mastery of his tapping into resentment and anger. But what I don't see, and this connects it to his inaugural, he said, the golden age begins now. And he just said how awful things are now and says, things are going to turn around and, just lays out a whole litany of things that are going to change. Well, are the Trump voters in 2 years going to hold him accountable? Are they going to say, okay, you said the golden age begins now. How come inflation is at still 5%? Mm-hmm. How come,
you promised us eggs would be cheaper.
That's right. Gas is going to go down, and so forth. So I guess the part of the Trump appeal that perplexes me is he makes these grandiose promises. He lays out a grim scenario, doesn't really appeal to people's better angels. And this is unusual in American politics. Usually a winning formula is to have a hopeful, positive vision. Mm-hmm. But, he posits this dark America, and then he says it's going to fundamentally change. And let's see what happens in 2 years from now. And the voters are just going to have to reckon with it. But he is a dominant force, and the Democrats have not found a way to respond to him. They just have not, and that's just a fact of political life right now.
Well, especially, it's almost like the idea of Trump got elected because, if you saw the rallies where he didn't make any sense and where, that one rally where for like 38 minutes he just danced. Come on. You didn't vote for that guy because, he had some policy ideas that you loved. It's John Shaw is the director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute. We have so many more questions for him. We'll be right back after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Joining me is John Shaw, director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute. We are, of course, talking about the election. And, John, there is the camp that says that Joe Biden promised to be a transition president, and if he had just stuck with that, and as soon as the midterm elections were over, said, I just want you to know I'm not running again, there would have been lots of time for Democrats to really test the field and find a candidate everybody could really get behind. And then there's the other camp. Somebody texted in, one of my listeners texted in this morning, Democrats lost the election because they threw Joe Biden under the bus. Many people I know did not vote because of that. Kind of one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't situations. Where do you fall in this?
Well, I have to say that I've adjusted my thinking. I do think I do think in retrospect, Biden should have, after the midterm, said, I've taken us through the dark ages of COVID. I've got the economy back on track. I've laid the foundation, and let's move forward. And let's open up the process. The problem with that, of course, is, there was no obvious heir apparent. Vice President Harris was a formidable figure, and I think has emerged this, after the campaign as a formidable figure. But it would have been an ugly, messy process. And I'm sure Biden, he spent a lifetime trying to get of his job, at least his political lifetime. He got it. He had defeated Trump before, so he can be forgiven for believing, I'm the one who, since there's no real clear heir apparent, I'm the one who can take him out. I mean, in retrospect, that was wrong. And I guess the thing that, and this is hard to know, but certainly as those of us, watched him in the summer, I mean, it was, he clearly had lost a step, multiple steps, and he was no longer anywhere near as mentally acute. And I remember about a year ago talking to a former congresswoman who said that she was at some event with Biden, and she said, I was stunned because, I mean, he, walked by a group of us, and there was about 10 of us who he knew for years, and he could not remember any of our names. And she said, I just gasped at that. This was like a year ago. So clearly some Democrats, saw that he had declined precipitously and were just hoping to be able to just kind of push the candidate through. Obviously, in my view, the debate was a horrific mistake. I think there's just nothing to be gained by debating Trump. Even the most mentally sharp and rhetorically agile person, it's really hard to debate someone who doesn't operate in the world of fact. And so, So I think the debate was just a tragic mistake, and I do think that I think Harris ran a much better race than Biden would have won. I think there's maybe Biden would have picked up a few more votes in a couple places than Harris did. But so ultimately, I sadly say that, I have great respect for Biden. I think history may very well treat him well. Remember, our last two one-term presidents, George H.W. Bush and Jimmy Carter, were kind of reviled and dismissed as they left office. And now history looks on them as both pretty formidable presidents. So it's hard to know what the sweep of history is going to say about Biden. But right now it looks like, he was not able to read just the political fortunes. He stayed in too long and opened the door for Trump's return, which in the view of many Democrats is, the most unforgivable of sins.
John, I read that in July, Chuck Schumer met with Joe Biden and told him how bad his polling was, his favorability rating, and the fact that it looked like he did not have the ability to beat Donald Trump. And the point of the article was that apparently, I think Charlie Sykes wrote about this, apparently this was news to Joe Biden. And Charlie Sykes' argument was, where's the staff? The president has access to some of the best polling possible, inside polling, private polling. And in July, he didn't know how bad he was doing. I mean, I understand a staff being loyal and protective. I mean, certainly toward the end of Reagan's second term, the people around him were well aware of the fact that he was suffering from dementia, and they really protected him. But don't you think it's a little bit different to protect somebody who wants to campaign again and run again? I mean, whose job was it? I mean, you would think it would be Jill Biden's responsibility to say to Joe, look, sweetheart, I love you, but I think you've got to stick with what you said before, that you were getting out of the business. Whereas immediately after that horrible debate performance where Biden was just out of it, supposedly it was leaked that Jill Biden was really, really angry because she felt that Joe had been improperly prepped. That was why he was improperly prepped. That was why he couldn't get a sentence out that night. So maybe she was in denial too. But it just seems, when you've been in politics for a long time, do you end up being surrounded, John, by people who only tell you what you want to hear?
Sadly, I think that's often the case. And sometimes it's just they have this kind of devotion and loyalty. They've seen you through thick and thin and feel like their responsibility is to stay with you for the long haul. In some cases, I don't mean to be too jaded, but their fortunes, their power, and their livelihoods are also connected to the candidate. So there might be there is some distorting effect there. You would think that the president's family, would have been very concerned. Although, those of us who've had parents who've gotten elderly and have had, dementia issues, I mean, it comes. Sometimes it develops very gradually, and you just, you are in denial. So, I mean, I think it's going to be hard to really disentangle, the dynamic between the staff, the Biden family and so forth. But I think, from the perspective of, the Trump inauguration in 2025, I mean, I think most Democrats wish that Biden, right after the last midterms, would have said, I'm going to stay for the end of this term, and we're going to keep fighting for our policies, but it's time to bring in a new generation of leadership. And I think that would have, certainly from the vantage point of today, been a better alternative to what happened. But again, I also want to emphasize, I think I know it's not popular to say this. I came out of this campaign with a much, much greater respect for Vice President Harris's just political skills and charisma and toughness and grace. And I have to say this, just, everything from presiding over the Senate, in which, she, affirmed Trump's victory, to the way she comported herself today. I think that was just total, utter class, the way she's conducted herself. And I think she is. I think she has a political future, whether it's as governor of California or running again for the presidency. I mean, I think Harris stepped up at the last minute and ran a really impressive campaign, and probably just did not have. I know there's a lot of revisionism as to whether she should have distanced herself from the administration. I mean, I just think 100 days out.
She was asked to do something impossible. She was still the vice president to Joe Biden, and yet everybody was like, well, how do you disagree with him? How are you going to be different? That's a really fine line to walk. I mean, do you dare say, well, I think in the Middle East, President Biden and I have very different approaches. I mean, because that's kind of biting the hand that has promoted her and fed her.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess some would say, I don't find this persuasive, but they would say you find a couple small issues, the oil depletion allowance. I really disagreed, substantially. You find two or three kind of small things that, you can try to erect a little bit of distance, but they don't, are not fundamentals. I know there's been some revisionist view that was a critical point in the campaign, that she should have distanced herself from Biden. I don't think that was a deciding factor. I mean, I think it was she had 100 days to run against a guy who's been running for 10 years. And she ran a really, really formidable campaign. She destroyed him in the debate, had a really good convention. And who knows that some elements of racism and gender bias were clearly at work, I think. So I think she ran a good campaign, and I think she's going to be around the political scene for some time.
Well, we can talk more about that when we come back from a break. John Shaw is the director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute. That's at Southern Illinois University. We are going to talk about Kamala's future and the fact that Karen Pence and Michelle Obama decided to take a pass on today's festivities and other things when we come right back after this.
Don't turn that dial.
A dangerous mistake to make.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now on WCPT 820.
I'm joined by John Shaw, director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute at Southern Illinois University. And you just said, Mr. Shaw, that you think Kamala Harris has a bright future ahead of her. I don't know what the long-standing traditions may be in this instance, but I can tell you that a lot of people who are listening to this station, people who, for the most part, would be Kamala Harris supporters, were very disappointed by the fact that she disappeared. She and Joe Biden both. It was like as soon as they lost the election, it was like Donald Trump was already president. They were doing very few, almost no public appearances. Donald Trump was stepping out and making pronouncements. And I know because I get the White House schedule. And I expected after that crushing loss that Kamala Harris would take some time to just maybe catch up on her sleep, process everything she'd been through. And then I expected her not to be on the campaign trail, but to be present but to say to Democrats that we're going to be okay. We're going to get through this. We're all going to work together. Any sort of message of positivity and hope. And day after day, John, I got her schedule. Oh, the vice president will be privately meeting with staff. There will be no public appearances. The vice president will be privately meeting with staff. The vice president will be privately meeting with staff. She disappeared. And a lot of people who listen to this station are very upset by that. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that's an important point. I guess I think it breaks in a couple different ways. First of all, I would be more critical of President Biden and his staff. I mean, it did feel to me that after the election, there's been this fairly venerable tradition in American politics, and we have one president at a time, and that the president-elect just stay back and let the current president, fill out his term and then step in afterwards. And that's a venerable tradition. And I've done some research and actually written a book on a couple of presidential transitions in which that is the norm. So, I mean, this was an utterly strange situation where Trump, being Trump, was hugely assertive. The Biden, I thought Biden kind of faded into the background and was deferential to him in a way that was completely unacceptable. And that I think also kind of made the question or raised the question about just sort of his mental acuity and ability to sort of, stick in the trenches and fight it out. Harris, I guess I think it's a harder call because, you lose an election and it's devastating and it's, the hardest thing you've ever gone through. And let me just tell you a quick story and I'll get back to it. I once interviewed, this was some years ago, George McGovern. And he of course, famously lost 49 states in 72. And I interviewed him. This was like in 2001 or 2 on a book that he'd written. And at the end of it, I said, Senator, I have to ask you, do you ever think about that election? And he said, every day. And here's a guy, this is 30 years later, and he loses by 49 states. So, I think I would give Harris some slack for just the crushing nature of the defeat. And the other thing is, if you immediately jump back on the stage, it looks like you're being ungracious. You're not accepting the results of the American people. So,
that depends on what you say and how you say it. I don't think it necessarily has to appear ungrateful, but I can't tell you. I've read about this as well as hearing people talk about this. There seems to have been, as soon as the election was over, a complete leadership vacuum. And nobody from Congress, nobody from Chris Murphy a couple of weeks ago gave an interview and he was like, where are the Democrats? Why aren't we planning? We're getting together and figuring out what we're going to be doing and how we're going to fight. Where are the Democrats? And I got to tell you, I was going, Chris, you're talking about exactly what my listeners are talking about, too. It seemed like there was just that the Democrats folded up their tent and went home, and there was nothing to conflict with the Donald Trump show every day.
I agree with that, and but I would put the onus more on congressional leaders. And I mean, this is where it occurred to me at the time, and it's even more so as you frame the question. Kind of the sort of the misfortune that Nancy Pelosi had stepped down as Democratic leader, because if she were the Democratic leader, the minority leader, even if she had lost the majority and the presidency, she would have been there, holding press conferences, doing events, responding, preparing, the Democratic agenda. And I think Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer kind of went into a fetal position, and in a way that I think was harmful to the party. So I would be the first to say I thought the Democrats, after November, whatever it was, 6th, just disappeared. But I would put the onus as much on the congressional leaders who are still in office and are going to be in office for not putting forward an agenda, not being visible, not asserting themselves as players. I would put the onus more on them than I would Harris, who's going to be leaving office. She laid out her agenda to the American people. It was defeated. And so, I mean, I can understand her perspective that, I laid it out and they said, no, what am I supposed to do? Just keep showing up. So I'll cut her slack on that one there. Now, if she disappears for the next year, no. But I think for the 60 days or so after the election, I think it's fair to give her some slack. And I do think it's fair to ask Democratic leaders in Congress and some governors, too. Why weren't you out more front, visible?
Well, initially, Gavin Newsom and J.B. Pritzker came out strong. Remember Pritzker saying, Donald Trump comes after Illinois, he's going to have to go through me. And Gavin Newsom also said some pretty strong things. And then again, from them, it was almost like Hakeem Jeffries called them up and said, oh, dude, stop talking. I don't know. It was like radio silence after that. I don't understand it.
Yeah, no, I think because even both Newsom and Pritzker were talking about, having special sessions to kind of, Trump-proof, their states and kind of construct policies to sort of mitigate what they perceive as the kind of the worst of Trumpism. And I agree with you that they came out visibly early and then both sort of receded. And I did wonder why after that initial push they pulled back. So I don't know. I mean, I think we are where we are. I would give Harris some slack, but it will be interesting to see what happens in the next 60, 90 days, because I think the one thing is clear is Trump's going to come out fast and he's going to come out hard. And the Democrats, cannot be on their heels. I mean, they don't have power in terms of control of chambers, but they got to be able to respond, and they got to be able to assert themselves as visible figures rather than just sort of passive players in this unfolding drama.
Yeah. While we're on the subject of women in political life, Michelle Obama and Karen Pence, the former First Lady, the former Second Lady, apparently have decided to take a pass on the inauguration today. Do we care about that?
I sort of, I'm going to just be very personal. I sort of thought good for them, because I know everyone's relationship is different, everyone's marriage. But I know, like my wife and myself, if she has a work event that I really don't want to go to, I might say, do you want me to go? And she'll say, yes or no. And then we have a certain point. It's like, if you need me to be there, I will be there. If you need me to be there, I'll be there. If you don't need me to be there, I will not be there, because I have the other things to do. And she does the same thing for me. And I have to believe, I have no way of knowing this, but I have to believe that in this case, both cases, both Mike Pence and Barack Obama, said their spouses, do you need to be here? And I suspect Michelle and Karen Pence were pretty emphatic in saying, I will be there only if you absolutely need me to be. And in both cases, they said, no, take the day off and, do constructive things at home or whatever,
Well, Karen Pence got a lot of media attention at Jimmy Carter's funeral because after his body was removed and everybody was like standing up and shaking hands, Mike Pence stood up and shook Donald Trump's hand. Karen Pence not only did not shake his hand, she didn't stand up. She remained seated. And people were like, oh, my. So somebody, I can't remember who, said she has redeemed the name Karen for all time going forward. Now to be a Karen will be to be brave and resist.
Yeah, and good for her. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, 4 years ago, that there was a noose on the Capitol lawn and people saying, hang Mike Pence, and Donald Trump did nothing to discourage it. So I would hope that, if that were a scenario where the case for me, my wife would have a memory of at least 4 years and remember this person wanted to have me hung. So I will cut them both some slack on their no shows.
Yeah. John Shaw and I are going to take another quick break. He's the director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute at Southern Illinois University, and we're going to be right back after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
With me is John Shaw, who's the director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute at Southern Illinois University. We have been talking about the election and the inauguration. John, I read something that I don't know if what I read didn't make sense on its own or whether I just can't make sense of it. Someone who I read, this morning or yesterday, said one of the mistakes the Democrats made in their messaging was that they focused on how Joe Biden had raised the hourly wage, and they should have been focused on median household income. It kind of seems like splitting hairs to me. Can you make some more sense out of that?
Yeah, I don't. That doesn't persuade me. I mean, I think they needed to have made a more thematic case that, just even in terms of overall jobs. I saw this number some time ago, and I haven't re-looked at it again. But I mean, I think that during the Trump presidency, the first term, there was actually net job loss. Now, this was distorted, of course, by COVID and the millions of jobs that were shed, and the sort of March 2020 to the end of the year. But I mean, in terms of just overall job growth, there was more substantial job growth in Biden's one term than in Trump's term. I think they could have just framed that issue better than they did. And this is maybe, I know people disagree with me. I think on the inflation issue, I mean, I guess you can't. I mean, the fact is that the administration has almost zero effect on inflation. I mean, it's largely monetary policy conducted by the Federal Reserve Board. And maybe that's too complicated to explain to people in a campaign. Maybe it looks too much like, hey, it's not my fault. But I do think that the Democrats could have made a much better case about just the economy during the 4 Biden years. I mean, I think it was stronger than is being given credit for. Now, people have a reality that they experience, and it's, kind of perilous politically to say, oh, the pain that you perceive to be feeling is not real. You're just not getting it. So it's hard to tell people something that they don't feel. But I mean, I think the numbers are such that the Democratic performance on the economy was pretty good. And I think that they ceded the issue to the Republicans in a way that I thought was just politically ridiculous. I just felt like they had a much stronger case to make. And I don't know that they needed to, start, distinguishing between hourly wage growth and other sorts of kind of arcane measures. But I think they could have made the broader case much more effectively than they did.
I want to talk to you about communication skills. Joe Biden, with his many years in government, particularly at the federal level, was somebody who knew how to get the sausage made. He knew about meeting with people. He kept things private until there was something to announce. He was very, very old school, but he was not anybody's idea of a good communicator. I mean, I'm thinking, FDR played to his strengths with his radio fireside chats and his melodious voice and his ability to speak to regular people. Bill Clinton, for all of his sexual shenanigans, in person apparently could charm the farthest right voter, completely over to his side. He just had such charisma. Ronald Reagan was, whatever you may think about him as a politician, he was a great speaker. He had a folksy charm. Are we at the point now where if a president doesn't have some kind of superior communication ability, they are going to be a one-term president, or they are going to not be elected at all? I mean, I think Joe Biden did himself a disservice by not, whenever he was making particularly address from the White House, when anybody would talk about his stutter, apparently his response was, "Oh, I don't have a stutter anymore. I got over it." But he clearly still had a terrible speech impediment, even before that disastrous debate where he seemingly couldn't stay focused or keep a thought in his head. His speech was stumbling and bumbling and mumbling, and he never seemed to want to acknowledge it. And I kind of think that if he'd have acknowledged the elephant in the room, he would have been a more effective communicator. But how important is that ability to have that kind of charisma or that kind of ability to connect with people?
That's a really interesting question, Joan. And I guess as you're framing it, I mean, I thought of Trump. And, I mean, you watch his rally, he is stunningly inarticulate. Stunningly, I mean, rambling, incoherent. But he did, I mean, it was sort of the kind of smart aleck humor that, the guy in junior year, I mean, the guy sitting in the back of the room was, saying snarky stuff as your chemistry teacher trying to put formulas on the board or something. So, I mean, Trump is hardly a great communicator in any conventional sense. I mean, he has, a couple themes that he just keeps ramming home, for his base, the sort of, sarcasm and name calling and the kind of sophomoric stuff works. So, I mean, I do think you need to find ways to connect with voters, to communicate with them, to signal that you sort of get what their concerns are. But I think like Obama was a superb communicator and storyteller, and Clinton as well, and Reagan and so forth. But I mean, Trump kind of raises a more difficult question because he's in no way a skilled, polished communicator, but he does connect with his audience. And people, even though lots of people would leave the rallies, I mean, they sort of liked that kind of smart alecky, sense of humor. So I don't know. The world of political communication is so hard for me to kind of fully fathom because, it's clearly not. It's not like there's this hunger for Adlai Stevenson-like eloquence and erudition and, quotes from Shakespeare and that sort of stuff. I mean, at this point in American politics, that is looked upon as suspect. But you do need to find ways to communicate and to let people know that you understand what their concerns are and that you have solutions. And, Biden certainly was not effective with that. I thought Harris was pretty good, but she had so little time to really, kind of formulate a message. So she had to kind of go with what she had.
The one thing that I want to speculate on, and I know people like you, John, hate to speculate, but I'm going to make you, is J.D. Vance. Do you see him playing any kind of real role in the Trump administration? Or now that, he served his purpose, is he just going to be, shunted aside and never heard from again?
I think I don't expect him to play a real heavy role. I mean, look at, Pence, 4 years ago or 8 years ago when he came in, he had good relationships on Capitol Hill. He had been a governor. He had a relatively deep body of political work. And I mean, he was a little bit of a, conduit to Mitch McConnell and to the various House Republican speakers. But Trump, as best I recall, did not in any way bring him in on the inner circle. And, of course, in the end, he was just trying to use him to overturn, electoral laws. So, and I'd also, the other thing, too, is, Vance is so clearly angling to be a successor to Trump. And I don't think Trump loves he likes to be the center of the show. And so I don't think he loves having an ambitious young man looking over his shoulder, kind of eyeing the throne that Trump sits on. And I think it's going to be so interesting, too, in terms of just the GOP politics. I mean, like Marco Rubio. The thing that I wonder is, like, first of all, well, even more broadly, why would anyone want to be in Trump's cabinet? Didn't they see what happened to Jeff Sessions, who gave up a Senate seat, was the first to support
and
Trump,
ended up getting humiliated.
And fired by a tweet. I mean, up and down, all the generals who were, fired, and national security advisors fired by tweets, Rex Tillerson. So, first of all, I don't understand why you would want to be in the Trump cabinet. I mean, this is not even a political thing. I mean, just the way the guy operates, that, if he just at some point gets tired of you, you're gone and you're going to be dismissed.
The first time Marco Rubio disagrees with him, he's gone.
Yeah, and that's, and I think with Rubio, here I'll speculate. I mean, for me, when he took the appointment, it's like, okay, he's hoping that he could stay for 2 years and then run for president. And he's made the kind of judgment that, with other senators, in terms of Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley and then J.D. Vance when he was still in the Senate, that he needed to, if he was going to go for the Republican nomination again, he would need to do it from a different platform than the Senate. And so he took Secretary of State. But yeah, if he makes it a year, I would be surprised. 2 years would shock me. So, but I think Vance will be, is certainly going to try to be as visible as possible and kind of position himself to run. And again, I don't think Trump likes that kind of second subordinate, and it will be an interesting dynamic to see how this relationship unfolds.
Well, and also too, why would Trump turn to J.D. Vance for anything when he has Zuckerberg, Bezos, and Musk, who can be just as sycophantic, and they have a lot more money?
Thank you for mentioning that, because when I watched, first of all, the notion that all these, billionaire plutocrats were at the inaugural and were actually seated with cabinet members.
They were in front of the cabinet. They weren't just seated with them. They were in front of them.
And it just, and to me, I don't know how people like Zuckerberg, you're a billionaire. Why would you be willing to be a supplicant in the way he is? And I understand pragmatically tax breaks and other sorts of things, but don't you have just a minimal level of human pride in which you say, I'm not going to be, a message boy or a supplicant to Donald Trump? So I don't know. Obviously, and I suspect, certainly Elon Musk, I will predict in 6 months he is back in wherever, running Tesla or whatever he's doing. He does not have the sort of willingness to do the hard, specific detail work of actually making government reform work. He'll throw in a few cliches and talk about blowing stuff up, and then he will get bored and he'll move on to something else. So I don't think
he'll get bored, or he will continue to overstep. Donald Trump has already chastised him once about staying in his lane. And now we've got the other Doge head, Vivek Ramaswamy, basically bolting because he's going to run for governor of Ohio. So half of Doge is already gone.
Yeah, Doge is going to be one of these short-lived entities. I think it might be something that historians kind of chuckle at a few years down the road if they even remember it. So I do not expect it to have a major impact in reshaping American life.
Yeah. How long? You talked about how long Marco Rubio will last. How long do you think Elon Musk will last?
A few months. I think he will. He'll hang around for a few months, and then he'll get bored of Washington, and he'll get bored of playing what he views as the bureaucratic game, and he'll move on. So, I mean, I think he loves coming, having cameras trail him and so forth. But I don't. I would be surprised if he's a visible figure for more than a couple months. That's just my guess. But
yeah, I think it's going to be a very tumultuous first year of this presidency. John, thank you so much. It is always a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you especially for spending part of your holiday with me today.
It's always a pleasure, Joan. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We are going to take a break for news, and when we return, we are going to talk to Chris Bury, DePaul journalist in residence. And for those of you paying attention, yes, every time there's a major national event, we get Chris Bury on the radio. So we will do that when we come back after news.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Whenever there are big political events, we always invite DePaul journalist in residence Chris Bury to join us. He is not only the journalist in residence, but he is a longtime network newsman. Been there, done that, traveled, interviewed this person, and always brings a very down-to-earth perspective, especially when I start to fly off the handle. Happy 2025, Chris.
Happy New Year, Joan. And looks like we're a few hours, 5 hours exactly into the new promised golden age. I don't know if you're feeling it yet. I'm not.
I haven't
here we
yet.
Are.
I have not seen it in the video, but I have read that at the Capital One Arena where Trump is going to meet the crowd, I read that there is a desk set up on the stage, and the thinking is that he's going to sit there and sign a bunch of executive orders, much to the delight of the crowd. Have you read about that?
No, I haven't seen that, but it certainly sounds Trumpian. It sounds like a stunt, which will please his followers. He's big on red meat to his base. So, this would fit right in. I think we want to check the fine print to make sure they are truly executive orders and not blank pieces of paper.
Exactly, because he's known for that.
Health care plan was on 60 Minutes when he presented the health care plan, and Leslie Stahl, took a look at it, and it was empty. We'd want to make sure. But, what struck me watching the inaugural events today is that, Trump talked about this new golden age. But it seems to me that it's really a new gilded age, not a golden one, a gilded age. Because in the front row of the inaugural speech were not the cabinet secretaries or prospective cabinet secretaries. Instead, the front row was occupied by billionaires. And that to me was a striking visual image, which I think may actually be the reality of Trump, too. And also something that I think that the media, all of us have to really keep a close eye on, because if this turns out that people like Elon Musk have unprecedented access and power to benefit the billionaire class, that's a striking change. I mean, money has always bought power in this country. Never have we seen this kind of wealth with such an influential seat at the table.
That's what Joe Biden in his farewell chat was warning people about, was this oligarchic influence. I did not see him, so I can't ascertain this on my own, but one of my listeners texted in that Steve Bannon was not present at the inauguration. And, Steve Bannon came out publicly just in the last week, and he said that Elon Musk was evil. Perhaps Steve Bannon being cast aside?
I didn't see that either. Bannon has certainly been a hugely important and influential part of the Trump inner circle. So if he wasn't there today, that suggests that he has been supplanted by Musk. And he certainly Musk certainly has a lot more money than Bannon, and maybe Musk is more useful to Trump. But for a presidential candidate who politically did a good job of moving the working class in this country away from the Democrats, not only the white working class, which he really, moved away back in 2016, but many parts of the black and Hispanic working class, particularly men. I'm not sure that they voted for a government by and for billionaires. I'm not saying that's happened yet, but it's certainly the appearances are there, and I think it's something that we in the media have to be vigilant about.
I was going to ask you about this contingent of Hispanic men. In his initial remarks today, Trump said, that he made so many of his voters were black men and Hispanic men. Well, that's not really true of black men. Big surprise, Trump being misleading and hyperbolic on that. But when it comes to Hispanic male voters, he did make some real serious inroads. Why do you think that is?
It's been going on for a long time. Some of it is cultural. Some of it has to do with religion, the overwhelming Catholicism of Hispanic voters, particularly in the Southwest and Florida. And part of it are those cultural messages which seem to resonate among some Hispanic men. A majority of Hispanic and black men still voted for Kamala Harris in this last election, but the percentages, and as you mentioned, in the Hispanic ethnic group, definitely have been slipping away from the Democrats, part of the working class problem that the Democrats clearly have. Even though Harris got endorsements from the United Auto Workers, for example, it doesn't appear that, she did great among rank and file. And, of course, the Teamsters refused to endorse, and the president of the Teamsters seemed to be siding with Trump on in many appearances at any rate.
Anthony Scaramucci recently gave an interview to I can't remember if she was an ABC reporter or a BBC reporter, but they started off by asking a very silly question, does Donald Trump wear a girdle? But Scaramucci talked about, he segued better than the question deserved into a discussion of this whole hyper masculinity that is associated with Trump and MAGA. And, he talked about the fact that in his personal experience, he found Donald Trump to be a very, very insecure man, and that this whole idea of macho-ness was sort of a cover for what deep down is a fear that you're not masculine enough. That hyper-masculinity, that macho MAGA, do you think that was what some people voted for? This idea that, so. Women are getting too uppity, darn it?
Well, I think that has been part of his limited appeal, is that he presents himself as someone who is powerful. I mean, his favorite adjective, if you listen to his speeches, is strong. Everything about him, that he constantly uses that word strong. So I think that, yes, we've seen these crazy memes of him as a bronze god, muscle man.
And with that official portrait? Ooh, is that creepy?
Oh, the one where he's looking just like his mugshot.
Yes,
yeah,
and he's lit from below in this kind
strange.
of weird serial killer kind of vibe.
But he projects himself as the strong man, and to a certain part of the electorate, that has been appealing. I mean, I saw sound bites with Trump supporters during the campaign saying that they thought America needed a dictator. So there is some, appetite for that kind of nonsense. And we've seen it also in his campaign, events, driving the garbage truck around an airport tarmac or driving a truck and blowing the horn. That whole kind of, I don't know, to me, adolescent notion of masculinity does seem to play into it, but it doesn't substitute for policy, and it doesn't substitute for governance and competence. And now he's no longer the candidate railing. He's in charge. And, much like his first term, he's going to own it. So, I think we have to, again, be very, vigilant and keep an eye less on what he's saying and more on what he's actually doing and accomplishing or not accomplishing.
Well, that was exactly the mantra that we heard from Rachel Maddow in the first Trump administration. And she has repeated that last week, her last week of only being on one night a week. As of, I think it's tonight, she's going to be on 5 nights a week for the first 100 days of the Trump administration. And she keeps saying that. Don't listen to what they say. Watch what they do. It's a very sort of simple recommendation, Chris. But one thing I've observed with Trump is people can't get past what he says. He tells them he's the greatest. He's been the greatest for the economy. He's been the best at this. He's been the best at that. And it's like I see people who just take his word for it.
And that includes the mainstream media. I mean, if you look on the front pages of the New York Times today, it's all about what Trump said today. And you're going to get some of that. Obviously, it's his first day. It's his inaugural day. But, Trump promises golden age. Trump says this. Yeah, I mean, but let's look at what happened over the weekend, right? His family came out with a new crypto coin, and he immediately on paper, according to the New York Times, was, made billions in a few days. So I think the media, has to spend more time looking at what this administration does and what the Trump family does. He's talking about, the further deregulation of crypto, which is already the Wild West. And seems to be profiting from it. Elon Musk is big into crypto and a major investor in Dogecoin. So, these are the things I want reporters to spend time looking at, because is this second Trump administration going to be about fulfilling the promises he made, or is it going to be about enriching himself, his family, and his billionaire, cabinet? Yeah.
Chris Beery and I are going to take a break. I'm going to ask him some questions about the media, specifically former tech reporter Kara Swisher has been very public about her desire to put together a group of investors to buy the Washington Post from Jeff Bezos. I want to get Chris to weigh in on some of what I've read and what I've heard when we come right back after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I'm joined by Chris Beery, DePaul University journalist in residence, former longtime network news guy. There is a woman who does a couple of podcasts. One of them, called Pivot, is wildly popular. She was a tech reporter for the Wall Street Journal when most of us didn't know what tech was or that it even existed. She literally knew Bezos and Musk when they were not household names, when they were scrabbling to try to be successful. She wrote a book about all this called Burn Book. She announced very publicly that she wants to put together a group of investors and she wants to buy the Washington Post from Jeff Bezos. She discussed this in a recent portion of her podcast Pivot that she does with a friend, and the guy was like, Kara, you're not doing this right. These kinds of deals are done behind the scenes. You don't make an announcement until it's all done deal. You're just doing this all wrong. And her argument was absolutely not. I'm being transparent. I'm not going to hide what I'm trying to do. I have no problem with everybody knowing what I'm trying to do. And she said, and frankly, we always hear like there's these management meetings at media outlets and, somebody will leak one of the emails or memos and reporters will be like, oh, this is what was said. She said, the heck with all that. She said, as far as I'm concerned, if I'm head of the Washington Post, everything's going to be transparent. We'll live stream the meetings that we have. And she said, mark my words, before the year is out, I will be meeting with Jeff Bezos. Walter Mossberg, who is a longtime, very prominent a person in journalistic circles, believes in Kara Fisher, says if anybody can do it, it's hers. It's her who can pull this off. What do you think about this whole effort? Jeff Bezos is ruining the Washington Post. People are jumping ship like it's a sinking ship. Do you think she can pull this effort off? Do you think it will save the Washington Post?
I guess my question would be, show me the money. Can she pull together the capital, not only the investment capital, but the working capital, because, to keep an organization like the Washington Post alive, you probably have to lose money for several years. But I applaud her aim and her ambition, because I think it is deeply concerning. As you just mentioned, the Washington Post is just losing, many of its talented writers and columnists in the face of this incredible cowardice that we've seen from what used to be the beacon, the North Star of political journalism in this country. And because Bezos has so far, so publicly capitulated to Trump, first by, of course, refusing to endorse Harris, but more recently, letting a cartoonist resign after her mildly critical cartoon of Bezos and other billionaires bowing to Trump was banned from the paper. And we're seeing this not just at the Washington Post. And I think the last time I was on with you, we talked about ABC News capitulating with George Stephanopoulos and the defamation suit, which was a ridiculous suit, and I don't believe could have stood a court challenge or a jury challenge. And we're seeing it with Patrick Soon-Shiong, the publisher of the Los Angeles Times. And so I'm really worried that the media is just running so scared.
Yeah, I don't understand it. I mean, yes, Donald Trump is all about retribution. And, yes, he will try to go after the people who stand up to him. But isn't that what journalism is supposed to be about? Speaking truth to power? I mean, the Washington Post during Trump's first term started tabulating Trump lies. Democracy dies in darkness. That was created, for the first Trump term. And now Bezos is seemingly trying to rein in his newspaper for fear that his space company won't get a shot at good federal contracts. But what do I know?
That's the problem with Bezos, is that the Washington Post is just an afterthought, because he does have these billions of dollars in government contracts for his space program, for the Amazon Web Services, and perhaps other Amazon supply issues. So he's concerned about that, his business, And it seems apparent to those of us from the outside that, journalism and publishing the truth and, shining a light on the inner workings of the administration, whether it's Democratic or Republican, that seems to be taking a clear back seat. So I think it's time for him to go and time for an owner who's truly independent to serve, the country. And as you say, the Washington Post has just got this glorious past, going back, to Watergate. And just to let that kind of slip away because we have somebody in power who thinks the media is the enemy of the people would be, a huge, horrific loss for the country.
Yeah. And I don't fault Mackenzie Scott, Bezos' ex-wife. I don't fault her for, donating billions of dollars to organizations that she has apparently vetted and thinks do good work. But why couldn't she buy the Washington Post? Call him up, Jeff. Dude, you got your hands full. It's me, Mackenzie. Why don't you just let me take over the Washington Post? I can take the heat. We can restore it to its former glory, and then you can just go off and do whatever you want to do with Trump. It disappoints me unless we...
That's a great idea. That's a great idea, Joan. So I'd like to hear more about that. A public pressure campaign on Mackenzie to buy it from the ex. That would be fantastic.
And, Kara Swisher hasn't said this directly, but I think reading between the lines, I think she thinks that Jeff Bezos would love to be rid of the Washington Post, that it's doing him no good. It's not garnering him any prestige. It is not certainly making him any money. I think, after they refused to run the Kamala Harris endorsement, they lost I think the last count was at least 250,000 subscribers canceled their Washington Post subscription. And, it's got to not be worth as much. So maybe Kara thinks she can get a deal. Maybe she thinks that she'd be basically doing Bezos a favor by taking it off his hands. I can't imagine that he's thrilled about it right now.
No, I think you're exactly right. It's small potatoes compared to the space company, compared to Amazon Web Services and Amazon, and he's right there in there with Zuckerberg and Musk. I mean, the billionaires are up there. They want to make sure they keep their hands in the trough, and they want to make sure that they are on the good side of the incoming Trump administration. And also, we should look at broadcasting, too, because, we talked about ABC News and Disney capitulating. I think there's a real fear that the new incoming chair of the Federal Communications Commission, Brendan Carr, who is one of the major authors of Project 2025, could threaten the licenses of the stations owned by Disney and owned by Comcast, NBC, and owned by CBS. So I think there's just a great kind of sense of timidity, if that's the right word, where, the people that should be looking out for us are afraid right now.
And with Bob Iger and Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, you would think people that wealthy and that powerful would be the least frightened of Donald Trump. It should be, people like on the lower end of the spectrum, financial and power-wise. People like me, we should be the ones cowering, not, for God's sake, Mark Zuckerberg, who could buy and sell most any country in the world.
Yeah, it's really disheartening to see them, change their tunes. I mean, now we see, Facebook, Instagram, and Threads, all owned by Meta. They're all, dropping fact-checking. Google's, fact-checking department has been eviscerated. That was when I worked at ABC News Nightline. Our fact-checking department was just it really was the foundation of our journalism. Every script that we did was fact-checked, and I was so grateful to our fact-checkers because they played such an important role in keeping us, truthful and honest, and also protecting us from, any legal issues. And the idea that these just, billion-dollar corporations can't afford to fact-check what are going to be outright falsehoods and not just falsehoods, but, racist and misogynistic and just, I don't know. To me, and my students have brought this up too, that the idea that there will be no fact-checking at the Meta properties is truly disheartening.
Yeah. We are going to take a break. Chris Bury, DePaul journalist in residence, and I'll be right back after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Joining me is Chris Bury, DePaul journalist in residence, and we are talking about the inauguration today and the incoming administration. Sort of tangential to all this, I want to talk to you for a second about John Fetterman. John Fetterman appeared at the inauguration today wearing his classic hoodie and shorts. And recently he also went down to Mar-a-Lago, where, among other things, he talked about U.S. steel production. Some people are saying that it's smart. He comes from a state that has a lot of MAGA, a lot of rural red voters, and certainly a state where steel used to be really important. And, isn't this what we want? People working across the aisle. But a lot of people, since Fetterman wasn't just a Democrat, he was a real progressive. A lot of people are saying, that he is somehow betraying the cause. What do you think about John Fetterman and what he's doing?
I think that you have to look at it with kind of a balanced view and take in his own political situation. As you just mentioned, he represents a state that went for Trump. And between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, there's just enormous red everywhere you look on the map of Pennsylvania. And he has always portrayed himself as a maverick, as an unconventional politician. And I think, to me, he's trying to navigate this new era that we're in of politics, which is so different. And I think that he knows to survive politically, he has to make inroads with Trump world, with Trump supporters anyway, in his own state. So from a political point of view, I can see that. And also, it's part of the Democrats, I think, trying to figure out what to do next. As your last guest, John Shaw from the Public Policy Institute at SIU, was talking about, the Democrats appear to be somewhat lost in the woods. They're doing very well in the cities and the inner suburbs, but they're losing ground. And we saw that with the loss of 7 battleground states. So maybe Fetterman is kind of a test case to see where Democrats go over the next 2 and 4 years.
A lot of people are saying that because the blue-collar vote really deserted the Democrats, or at least stayed home and deserted the Democrats that way, maybe not actively working against them, that the Democratic Party has to really, really break out of the... Democrats, I think, have always been big supporters of things that make life better for working class and blue collar folks. But whenever they've talked about it like college professors, Chuck Schumer is not exactly a man of the people. And some are saying that we need sort of a blue collar hero to emerge. I don't know if John Fetterman would qualify, since he seems to be ticking a lot of people off. But is there anybody, first of all, do you agree with that somebody more in touch or at least better able to speak to people using common language, that we need somebody like that? Or maybe do you think there already is somebody like that? What do you think?
I'm not sure who it is, but I do agree with what you were talking about in the last hour, which is communication is a huge part of the Democrats' problem at the presidential level. Joe Biden, for all his strengths as an insider, someone who did pass significant legislation, was not a good communicator. We saw that, and it wasn't just the debate. Joe Biden, obviously he had a stuttering problem, but beyond that, he was never able to communicate his policy successes, his economic successes. It was always in these legislative wonky terms, the name of the law, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act. People don't think that way. I mean, ordinary Americans don't think in terms of named legislation. And so communication, I'm not sure that many Americans understood the policies that affected them and that helped working class people. I mean, things like limiting the price of insulin to, $35 a month now if you're on
if you're Medicare. A senior citizen.
If you're a senior. Yeah. So, these were important, concrete, things that were accomplished. I just don't think they were communicated well. And, you and your last guest, John Shaw, were talking about this. The Democrats need to find somebody who can communicate in today's media, which is to say social media, not only on television, not only on radio, but across multiple platforms that are going to be antagonistic because the big platforms are owned by right-wing billionaires, namely the Murdoch family and Elon Musk.
Yeah. Chris Beery and I are going to take a real quick break. We are going to continue to solve all of the problems that exist in the world today when we come right back after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I'm joined by Chris Beery, DePaul journalist in residence. And Chris, are you nervous about what is going to be happening? Do you think, because there's going to be huge court challenges to a lot of what Donald Trump is going to try to do by executive order. When you think about the next year or two or four, what do you think about?
My greatest concern is that too many people seem resigned. I was reading a story by Peter Baker of the New York Times either yesterday or the day before, who said that the mood is changed in Washington, that in 2017 when Trump took power, that the watchword was resistance, and that today in 2025 it's resignation. That's what scares me, is that the sense of inevitability or resignation will set in instead of one of vigilance and standing up for democracy. Some of the things that he's talking about are going to face bitter court challenges. For one, he said he's going to end birthright citizenship and take away the right of people who were born in this country to immigrant parents. That's enshrined in the Constitution, in the 14th Amendment. So you can't issue an executive order and end birthright citizenship. And if he does attempt to do that, there's going to be a court fight. I think it's going to be 2 rock and roll years, but I do think that we just have to be aware of what they're doing, not just what they're saying, and that we can't afford to just, bury our heads in the sand for the next 2 years because Trump is back in town, and he, let's face it, he won a significant victory. Even though the popular vote margin is less than 1.5%, he won all 7 battleground states, and people were buying what he was selling. Mm-hmm. Now, having said that, you look at, his popularity rating, he's still underwater, as Biden was. And in this divided country, it seems that it's very difficult for a president to get above 50%. in approval ratings, and Trump is below that now. So we're going to see. He's going to have a little honeymoon here, but let's see over the next weeks, months, and years. But I don't think resignation is the answer.
No. And I understand exactly what you are describing. I was just talking about it a little earlier with John Shaw. After Trump's first election, we were stunned, we were shocked, but we woke up the next morning filled with outrage and filled with energy. And this time around, it is a different sort of feeling. It's like, oh, God, here we go again. We've been through this. We know what it's like. We know it's going to be awful. I think there isn't that same burst of energy and, let's get together, an indivisible group. But I think that people are still going to resist. I think that it's going to be a different kind of an energy this time around. Maybe fewer marches, fewer demonstrations, and more actually paying attention to what is going on legislatively, what witness slips can be filled out. I think we're like battle veterans. We're not that same dewy-eyed recruit that just came out of basic training. We've been there. We've been in the trenches. We know it's going to be a slog. And I think we're hunkering down and trying to figure out how we can keep things from getting too bad. I don't think we think we're going to fix things or everything's going to be great, but we want to keep things from getting too bad, Chris.
The other big part of it, though, is the guardrails that were there in 2017 will not be there, right? We're going to have an attorney general whose loyalty is not going to be to the Constitution, but to Donald Trump. We're going to have a Secretary of Defense whose loyalty is going to be to Donald Trump. We're going to have all of these loyalists in the most important position, and we're not going to have the General Millies who are going to say no, and that is something that's fundamentally different about Trump 2.0. Is that the guardrails that we had are gone, and he's going to be emboldened, of course, by the Supreme Court decision, which says that a sitting president basically, can never be prosecuted for his, quote, official acts.
I agree. It's going to be worse. And yet I still think Donald Trump is incompetent. Just like let me give you an example. Mike Johnson, Elon Musk killed the budget deal. And then Donald Trump said that he wanted one big, beautiful bill that's going to be undertaken during reconciliation. And no one has explained to him that there are rules about what can and cannot be done in the reconciliation process. But and even one of the senators, a Republican senator, was like, well, we could maybe split it up into two bills. And Donald Trump was like, no, I want one big, beautiful bill. Even though some of what he wants in that big, beautiful bill is not legally able to be done during reconciliation. He may have Project 2025, but he's always been incompetent and ignorant, and I don't see that changing.
Well, you may have hit upon his Achilles heel, right, is competence. One of my favorite words that came up during the first Trump administration was kakistocracy, which I had never really heard of before. And all of us went running to the dictionary or to Google, what the hell is a kakistocracy? Well, it's government by the incompetent. And so that may be the one area that I think we may be able to find some relief. Already we're seeing some backtracking here and there that, the across-the-board tariffs that were supposed to be announced today, guess what? They haven't been announced. Why? Because Wall Street would go crazy and the bond market would go crazy and interest rates would go up even more. And certainly some of those messages are getting through to the White House. So, yeah, I think competence is going to be a big deal. And let's not memory hole the main feature of his first term, which was gross negligence and incompetence during the pandemic, when he pretended the pandemic wasn't here and that it would go away by Easter and all of that nonsense. And it turned out that it wrecked the U.S. economy and cost, hundreds of thousands of Americans their lives.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the biggest thing protecting us from Donald Trump is probably Donald Trump, if that makes any sense. But we shall see. I think that relatively shortly we're going to see infighting. I mean, we've already seen it. Some far right-wing MAGA is mad at Elon Musk because he wants to get rid of immigration, unless it's immigration that helps the tech industry. That immigration, those visas, they need to stay. And far right MAGAs are like, wait a minute, that wasn't what we agreed to. That wasn't part of the plan. So I do think you're right. A lot of the guardrails are gone. A lot of the guardrails no longer exist, but, and it's a big but, I think that their own limitations, their own overreach is going to be their downfall. And I'm hopeful that at the midterms, we can regain one or both houses and then really, really slow down the destruction. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, typically presidents lose, especially in the House, in the first election after the presidency. We know that the House margin is razor thin, right? It's 220 to 215. 217 is
now it's down to 218.
218 because of
the people Trump's tapped.
Right. So that could, get even. And, on the right day, if not enough Republicans are hanging around, Hakeem Jeffries could be elected the Speaker of the House. I think that's unlikely, but, you're right. So it was 220. Now it's 218. And if there's a death or a resignation, it's just a razor thin. And you spoke of divisions. Well, yeah, there's the Elon Musk division. There's also the deficit hawk, fiscal conservative wing of the Republican Party. That's still very much alive. And if they are going to be blowing through the deficit even more, that is going to concern members who have been elected by their constituents to bring some fiscal responsibility. The deficit exploded during Trump's first term. The tax bill was completely unpaid for. Now the centerpiece of his economic legislation is to extend the tax cuts and perhaps give even more tax cuts. And if those aren't paid for, he's going to have some resistance from the sort of good government side of the Republican Party, what little of it that's left.
Well, we've already seen some problems with Donald Trump making the big announcement that he wants the debt ceiling to be raised or completely eliminated. And I thought it was, that's something that the Republicans have used to beat up Democrats for the longest time. And I thought it was so interesting. Elizabeth Warren was like, hey, I'll support that. I'll vote. You want to get rid of the debt ceiling? I'll vote for that. Where do I sign up? I'll vote for that. And the fact that something that Republicans have always used as a club against Democrats is now something that apparently their fearless leader wants. And I, for one, will play every soundbite from Chip Roy, who is a member of Congress who is determined that Republicans not forget their fiscal responsibilities and who becomes absolutely apoplectic on the congressional floor, taking his fellow members of Congress to task in the most vicious of rhetoric. Chip Roy made, the last time Chip Roy spoke about the debt ceiling, he got applause from the Democratic side of the chamber, which ticked him off even more.
Well, this comes down to sort of consistency. So there once was a consistency among Republicans that they wanted less government and lower taxes, and they wanted fiscal responsibility, a lower budget deficit, and they wanted free trade, right? Those were the kind of pillars of the Republican establishment for decades, plus being tough on Russia and communism. It's all out the window, all of it. Free trade? No. We want tariffs. Fiscal responsibility? No. Screw the debt ceiling. Russia? Hey, give them Ukraine. There's just no intellectual consistency at all. It's just, what does the leader want at this moment? And as we just saw with TikTok, that's going to change depending on who gives him more money, because we saw the American investor pump money into his campaign, and he flip-flopped on banning TikTok. There are no policies that he holds dear. There's only power and money. So, I think that's another thing we just have to recognize. There's no, principled Republican Party anymore. Tell me what they are, because Trump basically defies every single last one of those principles.
Yes, indeed. That is, it's absolutely government for sale. I mean, he used to be against crypto. Now he thinks crypto is the greatest thing in the world. And when he was still running for office, remember when he had the oil executives and lobbyists down, and he said, "You guys are rich. Cough up $1 billion, and I'll do whatever you want. You want deregulation? You got deregulation. You want this to happen? You want to open up more land for drilling? I'm your guy. But you got to pony up the money first."
And we saw it today, right? He is pulling out of the Paris Climate Accords. Drill, baby, drill. Well, we're already producing more energy than we've ever produced, in the history of the country. And in fact, natural gas prices were falling for much of last year because there was too much supply. And now he wants to join, countries like Yemen and Iran, who are not in the Paris Climate Accord, and virtually every other major country in the world is. So, there is no consistency. And so I think the voters who thought that they were voting for Trump policies, and, I suppose what that means really is immigration, because I can't think of anything else that's been consistent. So maybe they'll get what they want, but everything else, it's going to be all over the place depending on which moneyed interest gets before him last.
Yep. Chris Beery, DePaul journalist in residence. It is always a pleasure to chat with you, my friend. Thank you for being here on this very important inauguration day.
Thank you very much, Joan. Enjoyed it.
That is going to do it for me today. It has been a delightful holiday to spend with you. Just remember, President Obama said, are you going to behave? Nope. We are not. We are not going to behave. There will be no good behavior. Okay. So Patty Vasquez is off today. Ken Mejia Beal and Elliot Serrano are filling in for her. Tomorrow, Richard Chu will, of course, start our day at 6 a.m. He's going to be talking to Michael Hoffman, teenage author of Be a Scribe, Working for a Better Life in Ancient Egypt. That's going to be interesting. And then I will, of course, be here tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Jill Wine-Banks is going to be one of my guests tomorrow, so it is going to be a wonderful, fun day. Don't lose your sense of humor. We can't lose that. I will see you tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Have a relaxing evening, my friends, and take care of yourselves. Good night.